Well, if you're watching this, it's because you're either thinking about or are going to travel to Lagunica, the kingdom, or at least are in the planning phase of doing so. It's an interesting choice, for sure, and it's definitely going to present you with some challenges. So the purpose here is to give you some advice. Having been to Lagunica a good 3 times now, I think I have my facts straight, for the most part, as well as some seasoned experience, though I encourage you to do your own separate research aside from just myself, especially about where you're going to go specifically, because that is a factor. I don't know everything. I haven't been everywhere in Lagunica, so just consider this like a jumping off point for your journey. Now let's establish a few things first. Most importantly, the when and why. Rather than any time period dating before modern times in Lagunican history, since Lagunica does have detailed and documented history to it, so it's entirely possible you might have the desire to visit Lagunica at an earlier point in the timeline, I'm going to treat this only as if you're visiting Lagunica in coordination with the modern, say, 2000s to 2020s real-world Earth, since that's around the time our dear protagonist is warped there. So, we're going to be treating Lagunica in its world state and all its issues and stuff as if it's the Lagunica we see directly in the anime in current time. So no like pre-Witch of Envy almost destroying the world over 400 years ago version of Lagunica, or anything like that. Because that would be a whole different type of Lagunica with a whole different set of challenges you'd encounter if you traveled there then. I'm assuming what I'm trying to get at is making sense now, so second, as for why, I'll assume you're visiting for a number of these sets of reasons. Curiosity or adventure would probably be the most prominent reason. Maybe you want a change of pace from normal life and want to experience a semi-modern medieval democratic society. I'll explain more what exactly that means soon. You might be the adventurous type, and a seemingly hardcore place like Lagunica is right there in the old bucket list and is just another 2-week trip like any other for you. Or maybe, and this is the more concerning reason to me, you might be exposed to Lagunica behind your screen and want to capture, replicate, and or live the good and glorious life that you're seeing him live through. Or simply you are seeing the way people are in that world, and that's what's causing you to want to be with the people in Lagunica and form connections and relationships with them. And, you know, I don't know, maybe I'm wrong, but for the most part, I'm just going to treat this as if you're taking a weekend, 1 week, or 2-week trip to Lagunica, as is the length of most vacations that they typically are, and I'll be giving you a lot of the advice you might need on how to make it a safe, successful trip. So with that established, I think we can just get into this. So one thing we need to make clear right off the bat, and it's really imperative that you're aware of this, since it's quite common knowledge in Lagunica, that Lagunica essentially describes 2 different things. The entire world at large, and the Lagunican nation itself in the east, which is for most purposes the heartland of this medieval world, since it's the land of the divine dragon and the most influential and the most populated and all that. I'll definitely be focusing primarily on Lagunica the nation for the most part for this travel guide video, but I can touch briefly on all the lands outside of Lagunica, the nation, since you might full well intend to travel to another nation that's not the Lagunica country itself, or you might be curious and are wondering if any of the other places are suitable or desirable for travel, and I'll definitely do that. Right now, actually, that's this segment. So first off, this is really easy to get out of the way right now. Don't go to Wallachia. I don't really know why you'd want to go there. I don't get it, but if you do, and there's no stopping you, just be prepared for a certain number of factors and setbacks concerning it. First of all, be prepared for a trip only to Wallachia and to no other part of that world. I'm going to assume you're being warped from here on Earth directly to your desired location in Lagunica, the world, before being warped back here once the trip is over. So, with that in mind, if you're going to Wallachia, be prepared to stay there, since virtually no one is allowed in or out. That's just the reality. The borders between northern Wallachia and Lagunica, and between Wallachia and Kararagi respectively, are completely closed off, and inaccessible to common people who don't have political influence or are important in some way, which you would not be, of course. You would be a completely normal citizen, so that's just not an option for you. You're not a royal who can request to visit one of the other nations and cross the border under the guise of doing so under official business. You can only be in Wallachia if you're going to Wallachia, and you can only be in every other nation but Wallachia if you're going anywhere else besides Wallachia. Wallachia, in recent times, has hostile political relations with other countries, especially Lagunica, so taking your trip near the border of either two states is just something I wouldn't recommend because it might be dangerous or hostile in those sorts of border cities. And the security, especially, would be intense because it's on the border. So just don't do that. It's not as enjoyable as the countless other locations that you could be visiting. Though deals are being made by a certain imperial princess that has been softening the tension between Lagunica and Wallachia slightly, I've heard in recent times, but that's neither here nor there. It's still not very good, but this is not the reason you probably don't want to visit Wallachia among the other choices. The real reason is that it's an unstable, borderline military state years behind modern times compared to the other nations. It's isolated, it's closed off from the outside world, and depending on when you go there, lacking a clear and official leader? It's not like if you visited one of the towns or even the few cities that are in Wallachia, you would likely be fine living there and not be shot down by hunter-gatherers or called into military service or anything outlandish like that. That's not what I'm saying. Certainly not within a week or 2 weeks would they have another small-scale war in that short span of time. No, that's a stereotype if I've ever heard one of Wallachians. But I'm just saying that given how unstable, dirty, and generally unsafe a lot of the cities in Wallachia are, I just don't really see why you choose Wallachia as your place of travel. Not to mention how much of a nightmare the security, more specifically the border security, would be if you were to go there as a new face, even pretending that you are a citizen, which we'll be getting into later. Like, with how fortified the cities and towns in Wallachia truly are, because they deal with border hopper and deserter situations all the time, good luck getting inside one of these towns without running into suspicion, and worst case scenario, arrest from the guards. And, you don't want to be arrested. You have to pass legitimacy tests showing exactly who you are and why you're there. And I just don't see why you'd choose that whole catastrophe over the much simpler Lagunican or Cararagan security that would be infinitely simpler to bypass, since essentially blending in as a normal citizen and bypassing the suspicion of guardsmen and officials is possibly the largest aspect of what you're going to be doing when traveling to Lagunica. Choosing Wallachia as your destination would be like asking for a 10 times increase in difficulty on meeting the goal of blending in. There's just no feasible reason to subject yourself to that. Just don't go to Wallachia. But if there's really no stopping you, just make sure to follow the advice I'm going to give you on how to blend into Lagunican society to the max and then some if you're choosing Wallachia. Follow it extra. But to sum it up, realistically, you're going to want to go to either Lagunica or Cararagi. Those are the only two real choices, at least in my eyes. They're the most stable, economically thriving nations one would think of when thinking about the Lagunican world by a long shot. Gisteco to the north is a cold, desolate wasteland. That would be like the equivalent of wanting to travel to eastern Russia in the real world when Europe or even an actual industrialized and heavily populated version of Russia is just to the east of that continent. It's the same with Gisteco in relation to Cararagi or Lagunica. There's just nothing in it but rural, snowy villages as far as the eye can see, with nothing much to see at all. Just not a good option, really. Cararagi and Lagunica are the two real choices. So, now, as for those two, you might think the expected and obvious primary choice would be Lagunica, the nation, but actually, I would definitely recommend Cararagi as the place of choice you definitely want to consider. If you don't know, it's a very capitalist-centric nation that's built upon business for the most part, and in that way is actually very similar to many of today's leading first-world nations in the real world. In fact, I'd very much argue that if you live in places like the US, United Kingdom, France, Japan, Germany, Australia, whatever it be, or any the other countless smaller nations that have similar capitalist-based establishments, you'd feel the most at home in Kararagi than Lagunica or any other place in that world, because there's such a emphasis on business and free trade there. That's how they function, and Kararagi in recent years actually has a slightly richer economy than Lagunica, maybe surpassing it even more if the current trends continue, so you'd probably see even safer and cleaner cities and towns than in Lagunica and Kararagi. That would be more common, so Kararagi is definitely a very valid option if you were previously ignoring it in favor of the more popular Lagunica. Not to degrade Lagunica as its own option, since it's still very stable for the most part. It's really up to you in the end. They're still mostly similar, being loose democracies with a fairly similar infrastructure and style of government and quality of life, so when I continue on with everything else I'm going to be talking about, I'm kind of giving this advice that will apply to both Lagunica and Kararagi for the most part, because you're just visiting, not settling down there, so it won't make much of a difference if you're just taking a trip to either of these nations, how the experience will be. Now, if you were settling down and living there, that would be a different story. Then I'd definitely recommend Kararagi over Lagunica, since starting some sort of business or trade to make a living would be infinitely easier and more accessible in Kararagi, with its booming economy and all that. But either way, Lagunica or Kararagi, those are your two decent choices. I'll just assume you're picking one of those two, so I think we can move on now. The first thing I want to talk about is some more immediate concerns like language and health. This is actually going to be kind of a short one, because unlike what you'd expect when people talk about like traveling to civilizations of the past in the real world, if they hypothetically had access to do that, and all the horrible language barriers, since even if it was technically the same language as today, they would have been likely speaking a very early form of said language that would have been super hard to understand now, if possible to understand at all. Or, of course, not to mention the diseases and parasites that would have either no cure now, or the ones they wouldn't have a cure for that you would pass on to them back then. Yeah, scratch all that. Just scratch all that in this travel guide. Scratch all of it entirely, because this is probably the #1 factor that makes a trip to the Lagunica world so accessible, and why I don't outright recommend not doing it like I normally would for any other type of like crazy trip idea. Because we have seen proof in our dear protagonist who has been there and lived there for quite some time now. And he has not died of any disease being transferred, that is, died because of that. That hasn't happened to him, so it doesn't really seem like that sort of thing is really a factor at all in Lagunica. The important thing to remember, and I'll touch on this later, is that Lagunica is essentially a medieval society with elements of a modern society etched into it. They have the same technologies you'd expect in, say, the real-world 1100s to 1400s time, but through the use of the magic that exists in their world and how they can use it, they also have various privileges that we also have in modern society. And that's what makes their world so stable and peaceful, despite being Middle Ages-centric. So, in this case, they have access to the advanced magic of medical practices that allows them to effectively treat diseases and uncleanliness on the large scale just like we do. So, with this being true, their understanding and control of health and cleanliness in their society is about on par with ours. This is the reason that going there most likely presents you with no immediate threat of contracting any sort of Lagunican disease or passing down any earthly disease onto them. That being said, still get vaccinated before you go. Definitely still do that. You can never be too safe, and there's always a chance there are still some lingering diseases not shared in common by Earth and Lagunica that could be a threat to you, depending on where you are, so it's always good to be aware of that as well. It's another reason I would recommend traveling to the cleanest locations you'll find in Lagunica. You know, like the towns or whatever that are known for being, like, the cleanest. So, you know, aside from that, getting vaccinated beforehand for all the common diseases you might be able to think of would just be a good idea to keep your immune system in good shape when you go there. In fact, I'd recommend getting treatment for local diseases in Lagunica in addition, once you get there, too, so you can be extra safe for whatever you might encounter there. This might be done to you in the form of a shot, or some minor magic carried out by the doctor you're visiting. But in general, contracting some major disease while you're there is not a very likely occurrence at all, because they have the equivalent of modern medicine practices in Lagunica, like I said. Now, language. It has never been easier or more simple. Many of you probably already know this, but I'll explain it, more. In Lagunica, they're only speaking English. It's English because of their medieval England-centric culture and reflection of our world. And it's hardly even Old English, really. It's more like a slightly different version of English with certain phrases and ways of speaking mixed in that are exclusive to Lagunica and Lagunican culture. But this isn't even an issue. You'll still have little to no difficulty understanding people in Lagunica and the way they speak for the most part. You'll still be able to communicate with them just fine, as seen by a certain someone we all know who has done that and keeps doing that. And surprisingly, this reigns true in virtually every corner of the Lagunican world. Aside from a few randos, every nation seems to have one shared universal language of what we could call English, so it doesn't really matter where you go. They probably just call it Lagunican, I think. Now, you might think that since the original source material of the way we perceive Lagunica is in Japanese, that their native tongue would technically be Japanese and not English, or some other European language, but that's not actually true. Especially when considering when you look at their names and the names of the people who inhabit the land. Are those names Japanese or Japanese-centric? No, they're English and European-centric. They speak English, that's the intended language. Now, this only presents a problem to you if, of course, you either don't speak English or feel you don't speak English well enough to communicate with them effectively. I mean, if you're watching this video, especially this far, it's extremely likely that you do speak English, but if you really don't, or don't speak it well enough, then you might want to brush up on it a good deal before going there, because you will indeed run into some difficulty communicating with anyone unless you have at least a decent understanding of English, so... Okay, here's a big one. Money and currency. You might recognize this as being iconic since it's the very first issue our dear protagonist ran into when he took his unwilling and unannounced vacation to Lagunica himself. So, they don't use dollars or yen or anything like that in Lagunica. Don't bring any of that, it won't translate. There's no official converter machine of dollars to Lagunican coins or anything like that there either. It doesn't exist. So, I was stumped for a while and thinking of what you could actually do about this, since, you'll need Lagunican money to actually buy or do anything in Lagunica, even if you're just there for a short amount of time. And they certainly don't make Lagunican money anywhere on Earth, but, don't worry, this is a complete travel guide, so I have figured out at least some solutions to this money issue. There's a handful of things you can do. Number one, you can bring an item that doesn't exist in Lagunica from here and would more than likely be considered a rarity of high value there. And you can sell it and subsequently have more than enough spending money for the trip that you'll be taking. First thing that might come to your mind is like a flip phone or something like that for obvious reasons, but other items like a handheld gaming thing like a DS or I guess a Switch, most of you would probably identify with more, or any jewelry you might have here lying around, something that lights up in any way, since they'll consider that a rare sort of magic, most likely. Light up sneakers might be like an option that you consider, since they're cheap too. Anything that makes use of technologies not found in the Lagunican world will likely be seen as rare artifacts and land you some very big money there, for sure. As you know, magic is a very common phenomenon in Lagunica, so anything they don't understand, they're automatically going to assume that it's a magic item or a metia or something along those lines. That's what they'll always think, for anything they don't understand, really. And I kind of recognize that in explaining this, I'm sort of showing you kind of a get-rich-quick scheme that would work for you if you were like a regular inter-traveler between Earth and Lagunica. Not even a regular traveler, actually. If you just made it like one trip from here to there, stockpiling loads and loads of, say, light up sneakers, like I just said, or like whatever other magic quote-unquote item you could think of that they would see as magic, and proceeded to sell all of those items there, you would definitely make enough money then to become quite rich in Lagunica and live a completely lavish life and just, just live there, like, just rich. I suppose it's a good thing in this scenario that you'd be the only one with access of traveling to Lagunica and back, so then we wouldn't have countless numbers of people trying to bring their earthly valuables into Lagunica and becoming rich there as well. That would be a catastrophe for a number of different reasons. So, if you really wanted to do that and get rich through the loads of sold items method, as troubling as a concept it may be, I'm seeing that, that's your business. This isn't advice for living or starting life in Lagunica, just visiting, so I won't get into any of that, but I guess, if so, just follow the instructions of the rest of this video in the way that you see fit for what you're doing. Just regardless of all that, I think bringing and selling one item of technological rarity in Lagunica and using the money attained from that would be the best way to have the money you'll need, because just, again, selling one item would be more than enough. And there are, pawn shops and other trading services in virtually any town in Lagunica or Kararagi that you'll go to. So, just ask around for one of them and someone will definitely be glad to show you where it is. Just another reason to go to a town and not a rural village when you visit, I might add. But, aside from that, I'm not really sure what else you could do to acquire Lagunican money or to fund your trip. This is definitely the easiest and quickest method. The trading item method. I'm not really entirely sure on this, but if there are some small banks that give out, like, loans in Lagunica, you could do that. You could take a loan of Lagunican money for, like, a week or 2 weeks or however long you're going to be there and just not pay it back as you return here at the end of your trip. You'll just leave and you won't pay it back. It's a little mean and dishonest, so it's not what I recommend. I definitely recommend the first option of the item trading method. Getting a small job or starting a business there to make money makes no sense because, you'll be on vacation and would want to spend it actually traveling or relaxing or seeing the sights, so that just doesn't work. Okay, if you could really find a way to produce Lagunican coins here on Earth and then bring them there, go for it. It doesn't seem like the easiest task unless you work in a coin factory and know exactly how they're made. Just seems like my method is the most effective and just kind of the best option to go with. Just go with the fraudulent magic item trade method, I suppose we'll call it. Just do that. It's the best option for sure. Okay, now we're getting into the heart of it. We have the basics down. Now what do you do when you first arrive there in whatever town you're going to? To be clear, I want to make a big point of this. Your number one priority is going to be to blend in. Now, as a young traveler who is probably fascinated by Lagunica and Lagunican culture, which I'm more than willing to bet is who you likely are and why you're going there in the first place, you might have this idea in your head that you're gonna light up this world with your peculiarities and abnormal mannerisms and methods and all your knowledge of the more technologically advanced world that you came from, and you're gonna show them all sorts of amazing things that they've never seen before, and you're gonna amaze them and completely change their worlds and show them things they've never seen before. Stop. Just make it stop. Just make it stop, please. You are only setting yourself up for negative attention that could lead to unwanted outcomes for you. It's never a good idea to draw attention to yourself like that. The more you do things like wear modern clothes, go around showing people how a phone works and showing them Candy Crush on your phone, or telling them the inner mechanisms of a Lockheed SR-71 Blackbird fighter jet that would be totally possible to construct in Lagunica because all the necessary materials to build one exist right here. It's just, the attention drawing achieved from that is just not a good idea. If you had close connections in Lagunica and just told your Lagunican loved ones about those things that they would consider you crazy for, then that's a different story, but going around being like that in public is never a good idea at all. One, people are going to think you're crazy. That's just the reality, and I don't know why you'd want that, you know? You don't want people avoiding you, right? What if you need help? What if you really need help and it's dire but nobody wants to interact with you because they think you're crazy? They won't even believe you about the dire situation you claim to be in, even if it is true. If someone who claims that they're from the future in our world wandered around telling us about his instant hologram machines or wore unfamiliar clothes from his culture, it would be the same result. You would think he's crazy and weird, or possibly on narcotics, and you'd actively try to avoid him. So try to put yourself in their shoes. Phones and fighter jets and light-up sneakers sound normal to you and I because we're so used to it, but to them it's nothing more than a fairy tale. They don't know about those things, so don't do that. First of all, that's the main reason I'd highly recommend wearing medieval-like clothes that will have you fitting in with the rest of them. And not, say, a tracksuit and pants, but more on that later. Not only that, but drawing attention to yourself in the way that I mentioned also will automatically cause you to be subjected to people who will want to harm you or take advantage of you. Like, you know, that's another reason why it's a bad idea. If you walk around flashing your fancy phone to people, that would definitely catch the eyes of criminals for sure. Which brings me to my next topic, concerning daily safety, which this segment is, about. I want to now address possibly the most blatantly misunderstood stereotype I'm betting right now a lot of people have in regards to the Lagunican world that I know is just going to be asked about a lot, and I just need to settle it. It stems from what we see in our dear protagonist for, pretty much the entire time he spends there. But no, in Lagunica, there will not be a constant threat of death or an overflowing abundance of situations that you'll need to strategically avoid in order to evade death. That's just not the reality of the situation, and it's blatantly not true. The reason our dear protagonist has constant and recurring encounters with danger and death in Lagunica is because, if you pay attention, you'll notice that he is constantly, and I mean constantly, putting himself right in the line of fire of situations where danger is common and occurs. This would be like if you went to medieval society and directly and willingly involved yourself in every war and national conflict and noble conflict you could possibly find. On purpose. He willingly chooses to insert himself in the center of the Lagunican royal selection crisis. He becomes a part of the livelihood of one of the royal selection candidates, which naturally sees him tangled up in both inner conflict, outer conflicts, and deadly wars between political parties and cults. This is why he constantly faces death and danger, and dangerous situations like that. If you, as a normal man just like him with no magic or superhuman ability, do not choose to associate yourself with the affairs of political conflict, or with any high-skilled or high-importance individuals, which will be easier than you could possibly imagine to do, then you will not be at risk of the constant death and or harm that he goes through. Willingly. Yeah, willingly, we know that, and we can argue how stupid he is for doing that. But if you haven't noticed, domestic and normal life among normal citizens in Lagunica and Kararagi is overwhelmingly safe, secure, and stable for the most part, unless you happen to get tangled into a conflict between magic users, or in the case of crime being a factor in towns, of course, but those scenarios are still very rare, and the chances of you encountering any of them during your 1 to 2 week time in Lagunica is abysmal. You're not gonna get eaten by a white whale. You're not gonna get sliced apart by a psychopathic dagger wielder. You're not gonna be kidnapped and maimed by a Sin Archbishop of the Witches cult. It's just not going to happen. Relax, okay? You stay in a town or travel between a few towns or rural villages in Lagunica or Kararagi on a temporary trip, or even live there, and nothing supernatural is going to kill you. You can ask any local who has lived in Lagunica, and I guarantee you 9 out of 10 of them will say to you that they've never had a close encounter with death, or have been in a life-threatening situation via supernatural magic users, or witch beasts or cultists at all. It is just not an issue for normal people for the most part, trust me. Don't look at our dear protagonist and all his sufferings and trials and tribulations as a matter of course fact and apply it to the common everybody, because it's just not true or grounded in anything realistic. That being said, the only realistic threat to you as a traveling visitor is petty street crime in towns, right? This was my original point on why you don't want to invite attention towards yourself as someone who stands out. Because if you have exotic items or appear clueless and you don't know where you are or what you're doing, you will get mugged. You will get stolen from. I I guarantee you, for sure. Theft and muggings are very common in Lagunica, but no, not only does the average person not have access to magic whatsoever in any form, a very small percentage of people in Lagunica do at all. In fact, including especially when it comes to poor, lowly street criminals. None of them are going to have access to magic. Definitely not. Don't think that just because Lagunica is the land of magic that it's a super common thing, because it's really not. I'd say only about, like, 5 to maybe 10% of the world population there, roughly, actually has access to magic or magic arts of any kind. So, in general, it's just not something you're going to really run into at all unless you see, like, you know, domestic knights gathering or patrolling the streets or something like that. So when it comes to these non-magic wielding street criminals, defending yourself is very possible and something I'd absolutely recommend being prepared for if you happen to find yourself in that sort of situation, albeit unlikely. You know, bring a knife. A regular knife would work fine. It's not like you'd really need anything more than that. Street criminals usually operate in groups, but even with that, it's not like they're usually going to target you unless you A, appear clueless, lost, or vulnerable, or B, you go to more secluded areas, like, say, an alleyway, for example. So that's another thing. Going out at night is just never a good idea. Most people in these towns, like, get their shopping or errands done during the day as much as they can, so there's never any reason to go out at night. Criminal activity is definitely more rampant at night, obviously, and, you know, the people know this. It's why they never go out at night and why you shouldn't either. Whenever you're making your way around the town, always make sure it's during daylight, for sure. That said, what I was saying is that the minds of the criminals work like this. If they think you're a competent person that can defend himself, they're most likely, like definitely not going to bother robbing or hurting you in the first place. Why risk attacking someone if you're likely going to get hurt or killed in the process yourself? You present a simple knife towards them and make it look like you know how to use it, and they'll more than likely back off and leave you alone. So don't worry about that. Again, unless you're acting recklessly or wander into an obviously sketchy area, the chances that you'll encounter malicious crime against you in the first place is very little. Though within towns, it is still a feasible possibility, so it is something, you know, worth considering and still being cautious of regardless. There's really nothing to gain in bringing any high-caliber weapon above a simple knife to Lagunica, because not only is it not really necessary, if it's something complicated that you don't know how to use, like a sword or a whip or something, there's really no point in it. Even if the criminals won't likely do anything once you draw the weapon at them, if you don't know how to use said weapon, then it's really nothing more than a bluff. Meanwhile, a knife is easy for anyone to use. And I feel like this is already brewing in the minds of many of you already. So, but like, a gun just isn't a good idea either. In Lagunica, they obviously don't know what a gun is. If you draw it, it won't threaten anyone because they'll think you're just holding a big stick of metal. It won't register in their minds that that's a weapon capable of putting a bullet through their body at high speed. So just a knife, come on, just bring a knife. I think the last thing I want to say in this like segment of personal safety is that it's probably not a good idea to travel there alone. It's just because if you go alone, you might be more of a target if people think that you're vulnerable and have the support of no one. See, there's a reason why most merchants travel in small groups. There's a reason why parents have many children that stick together as siblings their entire lives. There's a reason why there's such an emphasis on identity to where you belong in society. It's not like our modern world where you can just be an individual and have the option to live alone and by yourself your whole life, should you so choose. It's not as safe a society in Lagunica since it's not technologically advanced and they don't have, you know, the mass security that we do. People could just die out in the wilderness and no one else would have any way of knowing, aside from a select few who have specific divine protections or whatever, thing like that. With the knowledge that anything can happen, people either exist or travel in groups or belong to a group or unified village because sticking together is how they protect themselves, you know, from life's dangers and keep order. If you're a part of a village or a group of merchants or a small army or organization, it's served as their protection from outside threats in sheer numbers alone, and deters people from wanting to hurt you in the first place since they know you have the protection of whatever group that you're a part of, especially concerning things like political enemies or rivals. So you tell me what's safer in regards to traveling to Lagunica. You and some of your friends/family posing as traveling merchants or missionaries or a local family, or you going alone as an alone guy traveling with no connections whatsoever. You get what I mean? Like, you may want to have your amazing and spectacular adventure by yourself and discover yourself or have the time of your life that way, but traveling with at least 2 other people as a group is the far safer way to go. You know? Okay, weird thing about Lagunica, but despite having the same spoken language as semi-modern English, they actually have an entirely different written language than anything you'll see on Earth. No earthly language, not even some old hieroglyphic language of the past, resembles Lagunica's written language in any way. So, regardless of what language you write in, there will be no sort of connection whatsoever, so don't expect that. It does make me wonder how they've cultivated the exact same spoken language, but a different written language as us, but we don't talk about it. You're not going to be able to learn an entire written language just for one trip. That's not something I would ever expect anyone to do. That would not be a reasonable thing to try and do that. So, you know, don't even try to do that. Don't try to learn their written language. But it's at least not so much of a big deal. In the same way that when traveling to Japan or a European nation with a different native speaking language, you can still get by the written language curve by, asking for help or assuming the way things are using the given context. So when it comes to things like, shop labels or menus or road signs, you'll just have to ask other people around you. I don't know, tell them you're illiterate. That's pretty much the only option. Of course, the people will find it slightly amazing how an adult such as yourself cannot read in any way, so they'll likely then assume you to be a poor man from the slums with no education, which I guess might not make it so surprising, since those, growing up with a lack of education wouldn't be all that uncommon at all. So I guess it really would work. It's definitely feasible. Either way, whether they're surprised by this or not, most Lagunican passerby are very hospitable and kind, so I'm sure they'll help you by telling you what certain signs and labels mean. And I would think, it would be rather possible to go your entire trip without ever needing to read something nor understand the contents of something written in Lagunican language, since obviously verbal communication is by far the more common medium. So, I really only recommend asking others for help in deciphering the meaning of certain signs or labels if absolutely necessary. If it's a situation in which you could, absolutely need to understand what something says to achieve a certain task, then do it. But again, I don't see how that'd be a very common thing, except for, when making certain purchases. But you can always ask for help in those sorts of situations, so... that said, even though there's an entire written language of Lagunica that's their own, you'll surely be illiterate in and not understand. Not really a huge or major setback to be especially worried about. It's not really that bad. Those of you who have traveled to foreign nations in the real world most definitely understand what I'm saying. Anyway, okay, here's an important one. Surely the basis for any trip to an unfamiliar place. If you're staying in a town, it's very easy and simple. Hotels and lodges, they're everywhere. They're all around. I already explained the whole money situation and stuff, so paying the necessary fees for your maybe 3, 7, or 14-day trip shouldn't be an issue for you. Some of the more expensive places to stay in Lagunica are so advanced, in fact, that you can even reserve different qualities of rooms or extra services like bathing or whatever. It's all available to you. In fact, in this sense, depending on where you go, your trip might even be very similar in quality and cleanliness to places in our world, so it's really not much of a stretch from there. As you can tell, cleanliness is key with these things. With all the vast differences in Lagunican and earthly culture and government, the level of cleanliness alone being the same is the main reason a trip to Lagunica actually is feasible and not ridiculous and something I'd recommend doing for the most part. I would argue that societal cleanliness is the #1 thing that goes into overall quality of life and livability. Cleanliness is why the Lagunican food is pure and safe for eating. It's why the beds in hotels are clean. It's why there's little to no risk of inter-exchange disease between you and the Lagunican people. It's what makes Lagunica a well-off society besides the technology achieved by their magic system. Cleanliness is what makes the trip accessible, remember that. Anyway, hotels. And if you happen to be going with the rural villages as previously discussed, and that's where you're going, you'd have pretty much no choice but to bunk with other people in their homes. There might be a hotel or two somewhere in the country, but it's rare. You will be very welcome in people's homes for this, if you're trying to do that. In fact, for traveling merchants, there are homes and lodges to stay in that families run, and they make a little living on that. You'll be staying in one of those, mostly, as you travel between villages. Also, where and how to eat. This is also simple if you're within a town. There are, food shops, restaurants even. In fact, very similar restaurants in design to real-world ones that they have. And even the hotels provide food services, which are all very accessible. They're very common and all over the place. Just go there and buy the food, because unless you bring a lot of your own provisions, eating out is basically what you'd be doing for, every meal of every day, if not buying some local food from the shop stands and bringing them back to eat at wherever you're staying. If you're traveling a lot, then that's a different and definitely harder to manage story. I'd recommend going to little shops and stocking up on easy to carry food that you'll be storing with you as you travel along. So, in that case, you'll have to become, or at least have someone with you who's good at rationing and stocking supplies, because you'll definitely want to make sure you have the proper provisions to last you however long you'll be on the road until you reach the next town. If you don't do that properly, then you could definitely be in big trouble, so make sure you have that down, since you'll have plenty of money anyway if you follow my money acquiring method. Just always stock up on more food than you think you'll need, just to be safe. And if you find yourself in the country, or rural places, which, me advising you against going to rural areas in favor of towns seems to be becoming a running trend at this point, but, your option is going to be, staying at people's homes who will then provide you, with food while you're there. On the road, there's likely not going to be any food places to stop at and eat, so if you find yourself running low on rations or reach your destination in some village area, then, just stop there and bunk with whoever will accept you for a few days, which, again, will likely be most people who will be willing to do that because, one, they'll be very curious about you and excited to see a traveling visitor, and two, most people in Lagunica, again, will be very hospitable and generous anyway, as it is, so yeah. But one thing I just thought of now that is not in this script of mine is that the idea that, for food, let's say you, instead of getting food at Lagunica and the little shops and towns and stuff and stocking up food there, what if you, brought food from Earth beforehand? You stocked up on, a week's worth or 2 weeks worth of food from here and then brought it there into Lagunica and kept it with you, already ready? So you'd already have your rations without necessarily having to pay for them there? And I was thinking that would kind of work, so you'd probably stock up on food that, isn't going to go bad. Because you probably wouldn't want to bring a cooler, just bring, a basket or something that is found in Lagunica that would make sense to carry food in. And you would have that. And, I guess that would work. I'm just trying to think of the logistics, but I guess it would be fine to do that. So maybe that is the better option than buying food in Lagunica. Just how about this? If you're bringing enough food to last you that long, it's gonna be a decent amount of food that you're gonna have with you. So just be careful when you're taking it around with you. It's kind of like having valuables, so make sure you're not gonna have it exposed into a position where you might be robbed because you look vulnerable having all that food with you. Make sure you're cautious of that. And so if you're doing a traveling-centric trip where you're going to be bringing a lot of food with you in a rationing kind of style, where are you going to keep this food? When you're on the road or walking around or just traveling, where are you going to keep this food? You're going to keep the food in a ground dragon carriage, because if we're talking about the traveling aspect of being in Lagunica, you're going to be using a ground dragon. So what is a ground dragon? A ground dragon are the creatures that Lagunicans use that carry carriages that people are going to be inside. This is very akin to people renting and using horses for long-distance traveling in Earth's history. In certain towns, there will be ground dragon rental stables, while in the country, certain barns will possess the same thing. You go there, you rent the dragon, you tell the clerk you're renting one from, where you'll be going, the path that you'll take, and they'll help you with like a map. They'll have a map for you and they'll even show you where you're going to want to go and what turns you'll want to make for your desired destination that you'll tell them, and they'll help you with it. In fact, it might be a good idea to always have a map on hand of whatever particular location you're in. Good for navigating within towns and when on trails going between towns, because, of course, you don't know anyone native to Lagunica who knows the lay of the land. No, they'll definitely always have maps available in shops within town, so pick one up there. But I know I just mentioned maps, but the thing that is so wondrous about ground dragons, they're more intelligent than horses for sure. So the thing is, it's good. You should have a map just in case, because I said it's like convenient for just like if you're walking around a town or walking around a place, then you'll know, how it's laid out and where to go and stuff. But if you're traveling by ground dragon and you're going between towns and through trails and stuff, the ground dragon already knows where to go itself. Like it's already gonna know what turns to take and how to follow a specific trail, because they're kind of already trained to do so to begin with, and they know how to do that. So theoretically, you could just rent a ground dragon. The person you rent it from is going to tell it where it's going and where to go, and that would be pretty much the only thing you'd have to do besides holding the reins and operating the reins of the ground dragon to stop it when necessary. But again, like working out where you're going to go with this clerk that you're renting the ground dragon from, and just like all those details is still a good idea. But just know that ground dragons still know the path that they're going to take, so you won't have to worry about them taking a wrong turn or screwing up your destination where you're going. It's not gonna happen. And another thing I should mention about Lagunica not being a modern society but having similar elements to one is that when you're buying anything, they don't haggle the prices of anything in Lagunica. And in real life medieval society, there were no fixed prices on goods and services, and that's just what you pay. No, they haggled everything, and you always had to like bargain for your desired price when making purchases. And Lagunica is just like here, where they also have fixed prices for virtually everything. So don't worry about that. It's also simple. So you just buy things for the price they are outright. But anyway, when you're using this ground dragon service and riding the ground dragon and all, and I suppose it's imperative that I go over this, since if you're traveling around even a little, you will be using a ground dragon, is how to operate one. Regardless of whether you're traveling alone or with a small group, since none of you have grown up in Lagunica, you obviously would be completely ignorant as to how controlling a ground dragon works. So here, you have virtually two options. Either learn, there's no real test of credentials nor ground dragon license that exists anywhere in these stables or in society, so you can absolutely rent one without worry of that. You don't need credentials. But similar to how if you don't know how to ride a horse, you'll likely not fare very well, were you to actually try and do it, if you don't know what you're doing with a ground dragon, it's just not a good idea to try and ride one. Now, as many of you know, you're not actually sitting upon the ground dragon itself, but rather sitting on the hem of a carriage just behind it while holding the reins that allow you to control the beast's movements, similar to a horse in a cart. So, functionally, it will be very similar to that. If you have experience operating a horse in a cart, then just go for it. Like, the skill would probably translate to a ground dragon, because I think the methods would be very similar with like a cart and reins. But if you have no experience with anything like it, you'll have to either ask the clerk you're making the purchase from or a nearby local to like show you at least the basics on how ground dragon riding works. It might seem simple, but with the reins and how they work, it's just not going to be something you get after working with it a bit. You definitely would have to have an experienced person actually show you how the commands work and how to make the ground dragon to go right, left, faster, or stop. You get it. Now, they might not be able to teach you everything in a whole day, but they should be able to teach you like the basics enough so that you can get wherever you're trying to go with the ground dragon. Now, they'll definitely be slightly appalled by seeing this grown adult in you who has never learned how to operate a ground dragon, especially if you proclaim to be a traveler and that's pretty much the only way that travelers get around. It would be the same level of shock if a grown adult from our world expressed inability in how to recite the alphabet or something like that. So, yeah, but ask anyway. That's the only way you'll learn. I'm sure they'll still be happy to teach you, since they have such a strong code of manners in Lagunica and they're mostly very hospitable. But the other option to this, and this is something I wanted to talk about since the beginning, is the idea that you might want to look into, like, being able to acquire a sort of, like, Lagunican partner to be a part of the trip with you. It might be hard to do, but there are some methods. The most likely candidates that will be willing to cooperate with you are merchants. One, they're traveling around anyway and might be willing to accompany you if you're headed somewhere that's of interest to them, or they think they can learn or gain something by being with you. This advice, however, does then mostly apply if your trip is revolved around traveling rather than staying in one town or place, because if you're just staying in one place, then you'd likely need much less help anyway, because you'd learn the lay of the land within just a couple of days of being there, and you won't be constantly going around to unfamiliar places all the time. But with this traveling option in mind, I feel for those reasons a merchant would be the best option. Like, it would have to be. Traveling bards are an option, or other similar groups of people who primarily travel. You could even join up with an already existing traveling group if they'll have you, thus eliminating you having to bring a group of your own to Lagunica. But merchants would probably be the best idea unless you play an instrument and bring it there so as to pose as a fellow bard, but we'll get into your personal story stuff soon. But if you either offer some sort of trade or compensation for a merchant's partnership during your trip, that can eliminate unto you the otherwise roadblocks or challenges you won't have now that you have someone familiar with the ways of the Lagunican world with you, such as how to operate a ground dragon, how to gather food properly, or especially how to read the Lagunican written language that I mentioned earlier. And in doing so, having a native Lagunican travel with you and teach you the everyday complexities of the world will in turn help you learn them faster, so you can nail and pin down the methods that will help you live there for yourself and become self-sufficient. So, I guess I should say, rather than bringing a group of other Earthlings to Lagunica, this alternate method is actually a far greater and more wise method to go with, for those reasons. Now, as for actually finding a merchant or a traveler of some sort, or a group in the first place would probably be the harder part. Not exactly sure of like a surefire method, but I'm definitely recommending then starting your journey in a big, high population town that will likely have a lot of options for you, and then going to like bars, taverns, plazas, or other places like this in order to form connections so you can reach this end. Taverns especially are common brewing grounds for traveling merchants, stopping for like drinks and to decompress and all that. Very common. So I'd try there. Talk to them, see where they're going and what they're doing, and that'll likely open a window that you can slip in and make a deal with them like that. And with this method, that might in turn mean you'd have to travel wherever the merchant was already going, so teaming up with them actually works because obviously you don't know where you're going since you've never been to Lagunica before. But if you do have a predetermined place in mind that you want to go to, from this big town as your basis, then you can revolve your story around that and tell the merchant that you're going to like Priestella, for example, and if you seem convincing enough, he might just join up with you and go where you want to go instead, based on your story. But in general, I'd still recommend going on the whim of where this group or other person is already traveling, because then they'd be so much more likely to accept traveling with you. Even if this may have to be done at the expense of going where you really wanted to go on this vacation, unfortunately. Let's just break this down with some examples. Like, for example, let's say you took my advice and you started your trip in a place like Kyo, a big Kararagi town, right? And then you might have wanted to go to a place like Nevada, I don't know, which is way down south in Kararagi. But then you meet a small group of merchants that in a week's time are actually planning to go and continue their trade in Banin, which is a town just north of Kyo. Even though it might not be what you originally planned or wanted for your trip, it would just be a far safer and wiser decision to concede and join them towards Banin rather than Avada, and have that be what your trip entails, even if it wasn't what was originally intended by you. You know? So like, I guess what I mean is, don't go into this trip thinking that it's going to be like a set in stone experience according to what you want most. For the sake of making sure things run most smoothly for you, if your goal is traveling, it would be much better to choose one initial place than simply improvise with what works best, like based on who you meet for your traveling partner or partners. Because, as I said, traveling with an experienced group of Lagunicans is the best way to go for sure. Unless you're just like staying in one town or village the whole time, in which case, yeah, bring a group of people that you already know from Earth, because then you'd have the security of being in a big group for staying in one place. So I'll try to keep this segment pretty simple, since it's honestly not that difficult to understand once you get used to it. But, in Lagunica, they do speak very respectfully to each other. It's a medieval culture, that's to be expected. You're gonna wanna, replicate that if you want to blend in and be entirely secure. But don't just come to the conclusion that, oh, if you don't address people with the proper titles or whatnot, that they're gonna kill you or execute you on the spot. Good lord, don't think that. They're not barbarians, you know? It's just the most likely, like, the thing that they'll be likely to do is give you, like, a stern warning. If, for example, you address casually a person of higher social status or importance. Like, even though they technically would have the power to take legal action against one who committed such a thing, and they would talk about doing so, most people, even those of higher status, like knights, for example, that you'll meet, won't be likely to actually do anything. You know, like, they're decent people. They don't want to execute you. They don't want to prosecute you if they think they could avoid doing so. You're right, like, I might be using that too generally. There definitely are some unpleasant and perhaps sadistic individuals in Lagunica who would take action against you if you disrespected them in any way as higher class people. That goes without saying that there are unpleasant people anywhere you'll go. So that's just another reason why it's a good idea to learn how to speak to others properly in Lagunica, so you won't potentially run into this problem in the first place. But for the most part, like I said, the general consensus is that most people in Lagunica are pleasant and would prefer not to prosecute or harm you, even when making mistakes that go against the social hierarchy or social norms and expectancies of society. So, even if you do make mistakes in this regard, you're not going to die, okay? They're not going to kill you. But when it comes to addressing certain people respectfully, here's how it works. Most people that you're going to meet, by far, will be those on the same social level as you. And since you won't know any of them, you'll address people with formal honorifics. Okay, so this is where it gets kind of complicated and lost in translation a little bit. The thing is, I did say earlier that canonically Lagunicans would be speaking English, so that would eliminate the Japanese honorifics they use in the original source material of ReZero, because that wouldn't make sense in English. But the other thing is, those respectful honorifics they use in Japanese ReZero are so ingrained in the show and the show's culture, and they also work really fittingly with the society they would have of addressing people accurately in the social circle of the world instead of saying someone's name with maybe like Mr. or Lady attached to it. San, Sama, Kun, etc. works so much better for that theme, and also makes much more sense with how characters talk to each other in the show. So for this instance, I'm going to include them as how they speak, even though it is in English, like it would be in English. Think of it like an English/Japanese honorific hybrid culture that they would have in Lagunica, which is basically how us English speakers perceive the light novel when we read it anyway, so I trust you see what I mean here. Just use San at the end of everyone's name. So, like, if you happen, let me just think of a random name here. Like, if you happen to, like, meet some fellow named Raid, or something like that, you would just say, like, Raid-san, just thinking of a completely, like, meaningless random name. San is kind of like the mostly formal and very broad and common honorific that can be attached to anyone who you're not familiar with. Most people you'll see will address others using either San or some specific nickname that fits the person specifically, or is a reference to Lagunican culture in some way that you wouldn't understand. So above that, it's better to just use San towards other people because that is widely accepted and very common. you won't stand out using San. However, if you do happen to come across someone of even slightly higher status, which is definitely a possibility, you're going to use something different. People fitting into this category would include, like, passing knights, business owners, landowners, any politically affiliated person, any nobles or anyone in a noble family, any sort of lord whatsoever, powerful magic users, anyone of any militaristic rank. The list goes on. You'll know when you see them. They'll be dressed differently from normal people and with higher quality clothes. Like, you'll see others speaking respectfully towards them too. Trust me, you'll know. Then you're using Sama. That's the second most common honorific you'll want to use. Sama is meant to address respectfully those of higher status or higher ability than you. It's what they'll always call lords or those of importance in Lagunica. So just make sure to do that. Bowing and not turning your back towards these higher status individuals is also something you can never go wrong with. And if you haven't noticed, in this sense, the Lagunican honorifics are almost, if not exactly, the same as how they'll speak in Japan, in the real world. So if you're already familiar with the Japanese style of addressing others, you'll likely fit right in and feel very comfortable in Lagunica's culture. But the difference is, in Japan, it's a social norm to use honorifics. In Lagunica, it's kind of expected on a structural level to use those same honorifics, especially when addressing those of higher social status than yourself. So it's very important that you learn them and use them accurately. Again, not gonna execute you or torture you for getting it wrong, but eyebrows will be raised and they will perceive you as like a rude or uncivilized person because of it. And you don't want that, so that's why you gotta make sure you got the proper honorifics down. Again, you want to blend in, that's the point. Because keep in mind that this is still a medieval society in many ways that mirrors a lot of the practices of a medieval world. Not all of them. And in fact, like I said, it's very modern in a lot of ways, but still a lot of them. Like, even though on an intrinsic level they do view each other as equal for the most part, kind of, there's still people of higher status that are meant to be seen, or at least addressed, very respectfully by those lower than them. Because another aspect that's exclusive to the world of Lagunica is magic powers and physical capabilities. Like, that's also a very major factor. Those of higher status are often wielders of magic who are so physically above others that they could, like, incinerate normal folk like us in mere seconds with their magic. Many people often become of higher status simply because of their magic or physical capabilities. So, with that being true, there's even more reason for there to be an emphasis on treating those higher than you with respect, because oftentimes those higher than you really are higher and superior to you. It wouldn't be like the real world where, like in the past, people of higher status were, they were like that way because, their family's history of being that way, but it's not like there was anything intrinsically dividing the higher class from the lower class. They were still humans of all the same at the end of the day, but people in Lagunica of higher status, well, a lot of them have really powerful magic, and again, could destroy people in mere seconds, so there's definitely more of a telltale divide there that can really push the gap between who gets to be of higher status and then who doesn't get to be. And not only that, but one of the reasons there's such a strong sense of cooperation and camaraderie in Lagunica is because of their strict social code of respect based on status. It's how they conduct with each other with the respect that allows them to take pride in their positions and houses or communities that they belong to, because of the labels and statuses they give themselves, and they take real pride in that sort of thing. That's why they make such a big deal out of honorifics and status labels. It's very important to them. Like, for example, okay, like if you happen to be in charge of a forbidden library of sorts, a concept that I'm just making up right now, I didn't get it from anywhere. In charge of a forbidden library in a noble's mansion, you would be a resident of that specific noble's mansion, and you would like take pride in the label of being a part of that, yes. But if you were so damn good at your job as the protector of the library, then, like people around you might, maybe not will, but people around you might notice this and maybe start calling you a title such as, I don't know, the Great Spirit Protector of the Forbidden Library. Even if it's not like an official title, like an official legal title, it would still be something that this library keeper would then wear as like a badge of honor of sorts, calling themselves by the same moniker and taking pride in the name that others had given this person who was recognized for their good and diligent work. You want another example? I got it. I'll give you one that's less derivative of something that already exists. If you were a farmer in a closely knit village, in Lagunica, and you happen to be an amazing, upstanding member of your little farmer community, you work late at night all the time, you share your provisions with people and are very generous, you're nice to the children, you do extra chores and take on extra responsibilities, a bunch of stuff like this, other people around you are going to notice this, and as a result, they might call you, like, they'll give you, again, another unique nickname that's, unique to your individuality. And that would be a title that they would give you out of respect for your hard work, and that suits, who you are, and is also a sign of respect for you. Other examples of this include, like, the nickname, the Lowly Mancer, or the Little Girl User, as interesting as it may be. That's, the title that someone we're very familiar with has, come to inherit, although not willingly. But it also embodies the concept that I'm trying to get at. That's how they view things. Lagunican culture has such a big emphasis on respect and individual pride with honorifics and titles like these. Like I said, it's very, very important to them. And you should definitely understand that if you're going to spend any amount of time there. But another lesson that I need to drill into is that, when you observe Lagunican culture and their strong bonds and sense of togetherness, and their huge emphasis on cooperation and loyalty and unity in their culture and stuff like that, don't look at that with like stars in your eyes. Don't look at it as like this just sort of magical, unbelievable thing. At least that's not how I think you should look at it, because just like anything else, they're cultural trends that are engraved into their society. Just like how the idea that, we're all equal as individuals is ingrained in modern democratic Western society. In us, for example. It's the same concept. Cultural lessons and practices are ingrained in society that are cultivated over a long period of time because we're creatures of habit, and that's how they're formed into being. Through time and practice, as they grow and reach more people and weave their way into the cultural consensus. Like in the real world, Western society, like in Europe, used to reflect Asian society in many ways, regarding their beliefs of how only the strong survive and possessing elements of totalitarianism. But over time, through Europe's modernization, they adopted more democratic worldviews with ideals such as government only with the consent of the governed. That cultural shift occurred as people thrived with innovation and modernization and social reforms, and only then were those democratic values built upon and reinforced in society as time went on and generations passed. The cultural values and ideas we have are based on hundreds and hundreds of years of innovation and reinforcement. Well, it's the same exact thing with Lagunicans and their culture of togetherness and loyalty. It wasn't always like that. The first settling humans in Lagunica weren't like that, I promise you. They only gained those values due to their circumstances, geography, the evolution of their culture, the reforms they had, the wars or hardships they went through. And even then, it wasn't overnight. But it was those things that eventually shaped the values they have now as changes were made. Lagunicans are humans just like us. They're completely capable of having a society of moralist scumbags if that's the way their culture shifted due to unfortunate circumstances. So just keep that concept in mind. Just like the humans you deal with every day, on a daily basis in the real world, Lagunicans are virtually no different, at least not intrinsically. They're not angel saviors that will lift you up and heal your wounds and give you a place to belong. Well, actually, they might do all those things, but for God's sakes, don't go to Lagunica expecting that. Anyway, where was I even? I completely forgot about the other honorifics. Yeah, I was going to tell you about. Well, the other ones were just Kun, Chan, and Dono. Kun and Chan are definitely more casual. Kun is more masculine, while Chan is more feminine. You might hear someone call a familiar male Kun or a familiar female Chan a lot while you're there. You can use them if you want, but probably not, because you'll likely not become close enough with someone during your temporary trip there that the use of kun or chan will ever be something of consideration for you. So that's why I really only explained the reliable san in detail. And again, it is definitely true that there are some very personable people in Lagunica who may call you kun, chan, or any sort of familiar or unique moniker at the end of your name if you meet them. That's definitely a possibility. So I'm saying, since there's a lot of people who are like that, that might do that to you. It wouldn't be the end of the world if you used chan or kun at any point back to them, or to other people. It's not the end of the world, it's just kind of considered casual, and maybe weird for people who don't know you very well if you were to call them kun or chan. Don't know, I don't even know why I'm mentioning it. It's just that you might hear it from someone older, calling you that. Don't know is kind of like the opposite of sama, and is used to address people younger than yourself in a respectful way. Mostly used towards people of official positions, but it would not be uncommon for, say, like an old man you meet calling you dono anyway, just to be respectful. So, that's just something I thought I'd mention so you know what it means if you ever were to encounter that, because, like I said, names of respect like that are very common and very important to Lagunican culture, so you're going to run into all sorts of them. Okay, so the basis of this trip is that you have some sort of Lagunican identity, and this ties into the whole wanting to blend in concept I was making such a big point of. You're not going to go there giving anyone the impression that you intergalactically traveled from another planet to their planet. You're going to want to blend in by making it seem like you're already a native Lagunican, and that you were born there. I already explained why. So, in tandem with things like dressing in their types of clothes, speaking at least sort of close to the way they do, having a basic understanding of social norms and rules, you're going to have some sort of pre-established Lagunican identity so people know who you are and how to deal with you. Unfortunately, you cannot just be random guy visiting and have that be what's on your name tag. It's not going to work. No, they're not going to execute you or throw you in jail for not having an identity, but it's going to raise a lot of questions and again leave you vulnerable to others that might want to take advantage of you if they know you have no status in Lagunica or are clueless of the world as a non-native. So, your story. The two best options that I have for you, in my mind, are basically this. Merchant, which is the best and easiest option in my opinion, since they travel by nature, or you're going to say that you're connected to someone else's household. What this means is that you're going to claim to either belong in the branch family that's close to a known noble or person of power, or that you belong directly under the nobleman or person of power. I know this is kind of hard to, but I'm trying here. I'll give you two examples. Let's say you're going to pretend that you belong somewhere in the extended Karsten family. I don't know any other influential families in Lagunica, so the Karsten family. You definitely aren't going to say that you're in the Karsten family, or you know the head of the Karsten family directly, because that would basically be claiming that you're a nobleman yourself, which of course would create a whole number of issues. One, the people you meet would be addressing you as a superior status person, which then would have the word spread and you'd be disproven as a liar rather quickly, so don't do that. But what you can instead say that wouldn't be easily disproven or create nearly as much of a stir amongst the people you meet is that you belong to an extended branch family of the Karsten family. Extended branch families often aren't super wealthy or known, but have their own degree of wealth and status, so it's much easier to pass off as real. The story that you're a member of that extended branch Karsten family just traveling to the town you happen to be in on official business is believable and common. It might raise questions as to why no one else of your house is currently with you in the town, but you can always either claim that they're not with you at the moment or have the other individuals you're traveling as a group with claim to be the other members of that family. Though, I guess the only thing to be cautious of is that even with that level of status, you may catch the eyes of potentially dangerous people if you're introducing yourself as that to everyone with no visible protection. So, that's why I still recommend the merchant option, or this next one, but it's probably still fine because you're not that high status, if you know what I mean. So this also coincides with my other example. You could also say that, for example, you live in a village or are a lowly house servant or worker under the lord of a mansion or landowner. Like, if you are using Roswell, as the landowner, again, can't think of another landowner in this show, you'd say you're a villager or servant under the Roswell estate and that you live in his property. That way, you're someone of low status, but it still makes at least some degree of sense why you might be traveling to said town that you're in. You could be accompanying your master, or someone related to your master, on their official business as a servant, and that's why you're there. That, would definitely work in my mind. Though not as common as a higher status house member traveling to a large town on official business, it's definitely not unheard of for people of lower status to potentially be traveling with their masters all the same. The thing you have to understand is that people of lower status or villagers, any who don't live in large towns, often have never even seen any large town in their lifetime. Villagers usually never have the funds nor opportunity to just take a trip to a large town at all, so they never do. The only ones who would get an opportunity like that are those who are able to move from a village to a town and like take that chance, like moving there for good. And even then, they'd start off very poor until they started making a steady income. But anyway, with these status relation stories, or the story of being a merchant, the most pivotal thing that you're going to need to nail down beforehand is knowledge and detail. If you're going to claim you belong in some way to the Karsten family or the Roswell domain, you need to know by minimum the basic current state and functions of these establishments so that your story is believable. I know I'm about to say a dangerous word here, but you'll actually need to study up on aspects of the Karsten family or the Roswell domain before making that your background. Where are their properties located that you're going to claim to come from? What's it like living there? Who do you know or who have you seen that also lives there? It's obviously going to be difficult to know any of those aspects when, of course, you've never actually been a part of any Lagunican family or under any Lagunican landowner, and that it's all made up by you, but as long as you have a basic understanding of what your domain or family of choice is like, and how they're viewed in Lagunica, then you can answer at least the very basic questions that you'll be asked and sound believable. Because, they're going to ask questions. The people you meet are going to want to, know who you are, what you belong to, what your history is. Not out of, suspicion, mostly, but, just because they're curious and they want to know, how to treat you based on what your identity is. And, again, they'll just be curious about you. Because you remember my whole thing on how identity is very important to them. They're not going to quiz you on the intricacies of your life or what family you belong to at all, but once you explain the basics of your backstory and status to them, you'll soon find their eyes lighting up as they now call you accordingly and know exactly how to deal with you. So, if you're going with the merchant story, you just have to know the basic merchant identifications. What do you trade in? You'll need to know what the popular trade items are in Lagunica. How long have you been on the road? What kind of ground dragon do you use to travel? What general areas have you traveled throughout your time as a merchant? Things like that. Maybe not all those things, but those are sort of the basic questions that you might encounter if you're posing as a merchant and the basic things that they take pride in. Once you have those down pat, there shouldn't be much else to worry about. So another thing I gotta mention is that when you enter any town, any large town that's not a village virtually, they're always going to have a small security checkpoint for people who enter, because I deterred your potential visiting of Wallachia by informing you that every town in that military nation has high fortification and security, but those sorts of checkpoints are present in actually every town in that world, though are of course way less strict and thorough in the nations of Lagunica and Kararagi. So less, in fact, that as long as you look the part, as I described, dressing like a Lagunican, traveling with others, having a basic backstory planned out, the guards at these town checkpoints very surely won't really bat an eye at you or check you any further than that. As long as you possess the basics of the appearance of a normal and sound-minded Lagunican, they'll without a doubt pretty much let you into the town that you're trying to get into. I'm sure of that. Just line up in the guard check line, whether it be your first town on foot or the next town you're traveling to in your ground dragon carriage. It's just imperative that you know that standardized security is present when entering any town, but in Lagunican and Kararagi it is very light, as I said, so just act natural and, you'll be fine. Though, word of advice, if you're going with the merchant background, try to avoid other merchants. Well, maybe, it depends, because I know I said that mixing with other groups of Lagunicans in the same situation as you is a very good idea, but merchants are typically very passionate and competitive people with their field. If you approached a group of other merchants claiming to be one as well, since Since they know the intricacies and details of being a merchant, they'll likely ask you very specific questions that you almost definitely won't have the answer to. And when they do that, you could very well be exposed as a fake. So, while maybe not outright avoid them, try to be a little selective on who you talk to, given the merchant status. At this point, it's really hard to say what background is best, since they all have their respective major flaw. As you noticed, being a merchant is the hardest to explain and make believable. Being a part of a branched-off noble family can make you a potential target and calls unwanted attention a bit, and being a traveling villager or servant under a lord is the hardest to believe in regards to being in a town in the first place. So with that said, it's hard to choose which one I most recommend, but as I list off everything, it honestly seems like being a town visiting servant might be the best one to go with, since it has the least amount of logistical issues and risks to it. I don't know. In the end, it's all going to be up to you based on what you think is best for your given situation. All I can do is help. So, I think I definitely covered at least a very whole picture of the basics that you'll need when taking a trip to Lagunica. There's some concepts here that I didn't touch on during my description of every earlier category, things I definitely feel should be discussed. These are some questions I felt that you guys definitely might have, so let's get into that. So the first one that I thought of, is it possible to learn magic while I'm in Lagunica if I have an affinity for a certain kind? Troublingly enough, yes. An awakening of some sort of magic within you now that you'll be in a land seeping with mana in the atmosphere is very much a possibility. It usually wouldn't happen or take any form in any way unless you were trying to use magic of some sort, like actively trying to. And the list of spells and castings are boundless, so on its own, no, but like if you were to specifically seek out someone adept in magic or run into someone like that who had an interest in showing you a few moves, then it's very possible you could successfully use a low-level form of magic. Not high-level, or advanced, to be clear. That's only reserved for a select minority of people with Lagunican, not earthly blood, and even then, complicated magic takes years and years to hone in a state where it can actually be used properly. Even if you, as an earthly human, happen to have an especially high affinity with a certain type of magic, you would probably be able to learn the lowest level of one of the most basic spells at that. Nothing more. Even if your entire lifetime was spent training, I guarantee you. Humans from Earth just don't have the same superhuman composition that's super compatible with mana that certain Lagunicans do. Now, there are 4 different types of magic, as well as 2 other extremely rare ones. You have your basic fire, water, wind, and earth magic, with certain people having an affinity with a specific one. Though a select few rare individuals will have a talent with yin or yang magic. Even if you happen to have an affinity with like fire magic, for example, you would still only be able to learn the most basic of magic talent even after years of training. Maybe a few spells at best. I'm just telling you this so that you're educated and aware. I seriously, personally don't recommend investing in this sort of thing unless you plan, not to return from Lagunica, as coming back to Earth with the ability to use magic, you better keep that to yourself and never show anybody for so many reasons I don't even think I should have to explain. And if I really do have to explain, then that just shows why you should not have the ability to use any Lagunican magic or expel mana whatsoever. So I don't think it's anything worth pursuing, personally. Though I definitely, see why people are enthralled with the idea of using magic, so... go ahead, learn your fireball, or your mind prison, or whatever other cool-sounding, show-offy magic you just have to have. It would be difficult and rare to find anyone in Lagunica who can use magic anyway, so... As again, it's only for a select few people who actually have the capacity to use it. Divine protections and authorities also exist, but those aren't even... those are even more rare to come by, and you can't learn those. You're born with them, so not a factor. What about the future canon events of Lagunica? So, this gets into some weird territory, but I still wanted to address it because I feel like some of you are thinking about this sort of thing. I mentioned earlier that when you're traveling there, I'm going to treat it as if it's the regular modern timeline, and it would be somewhere around the events of Arcs 1 through 9 of ReZero, since all the arcs take place within the span of just 2 years, if you didn't know that. So it could be during when those events take place, or maybe a few years before, or a few years after. Do you see what I'm saying? I know this gets into some weird paradoxical territory, but I guess we can assume the canon events that our dear protagonist goes through do in fact happen, and all the characters we see do exist and do everything that they end up doing. So, despite my earlier specific example, the smartest decision you may ever make while in Lagunica is not associating in any way with the Roswell domain, nor the Roswell mansion, and risk getting tangled up in everything that happens involving it. Maybe choose a different Lord's property, like, and going against the Roswell example that I gave earlier, but that was just because I couldn't think of anyone else. But this is really difficult to say since the story obviously isn't over at the time of this travel guide's release, and we don't know the whole of the events that happen concerning Lagunica for the final arcs, but depending on when you do go there, if the Lagunican kingdom is lacking a ruler and is currently in the process of a royal selection, then you'll know. The thing is, none of those canon events involve nor endanger the lives of any average Lagunican citizens unless you happen to be in, say, Arlon Village, the Sanctuary, or Priestella, as far as we know in the story. So, just when you arrive there, figure out what the timeline is, as evident by the state of the kingdom and presence of an ongoing royal selection, and if there is one, just don't go to those places and you'll be fine. The canon events of the story hardly have normal citizens entangled in their events, if at all. So, even, if you were there during the brunt of the canon story, you just live your life and pretty much be fine for the most part. Lagunica is a peaceful society in its normal state, very much so. Like I said, don't let the events our dear protagonist goes through convince you otherwise. Just don't do anything stupid like trying to encounter, let's say, any of these widely recognized characters and do something like trying to inform them of what occurs in their story, quote-unquote. I'm just giving an example here of something stupid that I could imagine someone doing. The brunt of the horrible events taking place in the canon story are all associated with these select characters because of their high power and relation to other powerful people in that world, so associating with them, like I said, is about the worst mistake you can make. I don't care how cool they are, or how loyal you wish they were towards you, or how much you want to marry or do unspeakable things with some of them. Just don't interact nor associate yourself with anyone. With any of them. Don't do it. You don't want to die. You don't want to suffer. I know, we want so bad an autograph from Reinhardt, or a kiss on the lips from Amelia, but it's gonna bite you in the long run, friend. Count on it. What if I'm abnormal in some way, have an accent unfamiliar to Lagunicans, have autism, or am mentally challenged, or have a physical deformity, or a mental deformity, or whatever else? It's actually not nearly as bad as you might think. They'll bat an eye towards things like that at first, but an important thing to understand is that since the world of Lagunica's population is so diverse and has many different types of people anyway, so for example the existence of demi-humans alone, people being different in a way that they haven't seen before is not a foreign concept to them at all. Like, in small villages, if a demi-human were to visit that place, villagers in Lagunica have probably never seen a demi-human in their entire lives. They know of their existence, they've heard about them from others, they've read about them, but they would be super excited and curious when actually seeing one because the act of seeing is foreign, but the understanding of the concept is not. If you showed up there and had like a, for example, Middle Eastern accent that doesn't exist anywhere in the Lagunican world, have Down syndrome and it shows just by you talking, or has some other abnormality like being blind or having Tourette's or whatever, they're going to be surprised and shocked at first, but you'll be hard-pressed to find anyone who would treat you any differently about it. I guarantee you most of them would be very kind, patient, and even help you get by if you have an affliction that makes functioning in social situations difficult for you. Sure, you'd probably have some not-so-kind people who would make fun of you or even take advantage of you for being different, but that's true in any society. For the most part, there won't be any discrimination of any kind, so any impairment or disability I can really think of, if you can function enough in our world and are able to travel, you shouldn't have any problems of any kind in Lagunica, so it's really not that much of an issue. Well, not sure if I can really think of anything else or any other questions people might have, so that's where you ought to help me out down in the comments if there's anything else you're wondering about for your trip that I did not cover anywhere in this guide or in the random questions section. And I might do a Q&A video on this later for your comments. But, I hope I helped prepare you for a trip to Lagunica. I both understand and have no idea why someone would want to go there and vacation there, so yeah, have fun. Just keep in mind everything I said and make it a trip to remember.